Okay, so what did you get from the video other than aerobic and anaerobic respirations? What are both doing to us when we breathe? So you saw the link between our breathing and exercise and where those things are consumed. There are two things that we consume. We consume oxygen and we also take glucose and other types of nutrients. Both of those are used in all the cells of our body, especially the cells which are very active cells, and those are our muscle cells. Oxygen and glucose both go inside our muscle cells, and this is where they are consumed eventually. What happens to glucose? Glucose breaks down, and what comes out of that? ATP. We also get carbon dioxide gas. And the third product that we get is water molecules. So glucose is completely gone. At that time, it gives good amount of ATP, and then these two are the products that are released in the process. These are the two things that we exhale. Carbon dioxide gas and water molecules are exhaled at the time when we respire. So when we don't have enough oxygen, this process still continues. The process of generation of ATP still continues. And that is a condition that is done in our muscles. Because muscles, even though take part from this oxygen that we take from inhalation, but still, if you start to exercise, that oxygen is not enough at that time. So when you start to exercise, you're running or doing aerobics or swimming or anything like that, then even though you are inhaling a lot of oxygen, but that is not enough at that time, muscles can store some amount of oxygen. So they have one protein, which is what really carries some of that oxygen, stores some of the oxygen, and it is used at that time. So since it's not being replenished at the time of exercise, so that condition becomes as if you are living in an environment, or your cells are living in an environment where there is no oxygen that is being supplied. So at that time, glucose is still inside the cells, because muscles are also cells. Glucose is still there, but what happens in that case is, instead of producing these two products and large amount of ATP, it produces lactic acid, and it produces small amount of ATP.
So when you take the oxygen and the carbon away, is producing it.
That's right. So in our normal process is we are producing from glucose molecule that we consume, we are producing large amount of ATP. And we also have these byproducts that come out of that process as well. So the number is fairly high. From single glucose molecule, that number is somewhere between 34 and 36 ATP molecules. But when our muscles, which are not really used to storing, for example, if I start running, my muscles are not really used to exercising. So versus those athletes, they can actually store a lot more. So your sprinters and other people who are more into exercising, then they are actually more used to getting a lot more in their muscles. But my muscles are not really ready for that. So lactic acid is produced in response to my exercise. So if I start walking even today, a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles, I will have muscle fatigue. My muscles will get tired. They will start hurting. They will stop working very well, and actually they may become completely very stiff, and I may have to wait another 4 or 5 days to get rid of this lactic acid that is that takes some time to be released from the muscles, because it is taken to the liver, and liver breaks it down, so then things get okay. And other thing that happen at the same time, when muscles are really going through lack of oxygen type of consumption, then acids are produced. This acid is produced Then there are other conditions too that we'll cover in under muscle fatigue. So it used to be that we used to study that it was only lactic acid that was causing it. There are other factors that are responsible for that as well. So some of the athletes who run, you might have seen some of those. If they, towards the end, actually they do a lot of struggle, to beat other people. Sometimes they collapse because they basically run out of this factor here completely. They actually don't have enough oxygen left. So when they do this one more push towards the end, they just collapse, and they cannot walk anymore. They cannot really do anything. They have to have some time to replenish themselves.
The steroids that they be using or body enhancer stuff, what does that do to the ATP molecule? I mean, what is it?
Steroids actually help to build the muscle, to parts of the body, more tissue in the body.
Oh, okay.
So when you have more tissue in the body, you can store more.
Oh, okay.
So that, all these athletes, not all actually, most of them, or maybe all of them, they actually use a lot of those drugs, different types of endurance drugs that can help them. Some of the newer ones actually are proteins, that they actually can take those proteins and it helps them to retain more oxygen. So, and those are, they are getting smarter too. So this is what we actually saw in that video. So muscles, it was just all based on the muscles, and different people actually work on their different muscles, and it helped them different way. So this is what these are the functions of the muscles in the body. They help us to be like we are. We cannot stand, we cannot sit if the muscles are not there. They help us to move, maintain our posture of the body. We can sit because of the muscles on the back, or our legs are straight because of the muscles of our legs also. Respiration cannot take place without muscles also, because when we respire, these are the muscles that actually help us to respire. Our thoracic muscles are the one that help us and maintain the level of flow of oxygen and carbon dioxide gas from our lungs. Production of the body heat is a function of the muscles as well. So when muscles contract, they not only make us move and do other things, they also generate amount of heat that actually help us to be at the temperature that our body is at. Muscles help us to communicate. How do they help us to communicate?
Speech and facial.
Speech,
Yeah.
your expressions, your writing, you write with your hands. So all those forms of communications. Heartbeat, because of the muscle. Heart is the muscle, and it's the strongest muscle, probably the strongest known muscle of any type, anywhere. It can beat for more than 120 years or so. Some people who live that long, they probably never had any heart problem. So it is designed to last over life. So if we don't actually hurt it with different things that we do to it, then it can live for a very long period of time. For constriction of different organs, the blood flows through our blood vessels because of constriction of muscles. Food flows through our GI tract because of constriction. So all of those are important functions of muscular system. There are three main types of muscles: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscles. Skeletal muscles are probably the majority of the muscle that we see. Smooth muscles are inside, they are present inside the tubes, inside different organs, and cardiac muscles are found in our heart. So the first type of muscles, which are skeletal muscles, skeletal muscles are very significant because of their contractility. They can contract, they can relax. They can be excited also. They can be excited through different stimuli. And usually those stimuli are the ones that are sent by the brain. Brain actually sends signal. So whenever we move our muscles, even though we think we can control it, but if there is something wrong with the signal coming from the brain, we cannot move it. There are several conditions, there are several disorders where people who are normal, they cannot actually move their muscles. because the connection to the brain is disrupted. So those muscles are excitable. They can actually respond to some sort of an electric signal or chemical signal that comes from other organs of our body. They can be extended, they can be retracted, they can stretch, like, I can stretch my arm, I can retract it, stretch, retract. So even though I'm controlling it, but it is being done by the brain. So things can, and muscles are also elastic, they can recoil. They expand, they recoil back to their original positions also. You can expand them, but they will recoil back to their original position. So they are very elastic in that regard. And all movements of the body are because of these characteristics, these abilities of our skeletal muscle. They can contract, they can be excited, they can extend, and they also are flexible. They are elastic in nature. There's some information about the skeletal muscles. They are about 40% of our body weight, and in some cases actually they're more than that. Athletes have larger portion of their body which is made of the skeletal muscles. They are called skeletal because they are part of our skeleton. They are attached to our skeleton, and in this case they are striped. They are striated. They have those kind of vertical lines that you can see under microscope. So they are very significantly different compared with other cells of our body. So they look very different. That's why they are a lot of, in a lot of ways they are a lot easier to identify them or differentiate them from other types of cells of the body. Skeletal muscles are multinucleated, meaning that they have multiple nuclei in them. They are made as single cells initially, but gradually those cells lose. So when they are produced as individual cells. But those individual cells fuse through development to become single cell, just a single cell, but they still retain their nuclei inside. So it becomes in a long cell. It's called myofibrils or muscle cells. Muscle cells are the ones that make the muscle. So they are long cells. They are large cells that have multiple nuclei in them. They are the longest of the muscle types also. Heart muscle is not very long. Some of the muscles of our body, like on the back side, is a very large muscle. Pretty much all the back side of our body is just one muscle. Then some of the muscles which are our leg muscles are very long. They start from here and they go all the way to the lower part of our leg also. So they are very long, and they're the longest of the three. Each muscle tissue consists of these three main layers: epimysium, and then perimysium and endomysium are the three layers. So epi, peri, and endomysium are the three layers that are present around muscles. Epimysium is the outermost. These are connective tissues. So they are not cells, they are connective tissues. Epimysium is the outermost, then perimysium is an internal one, which is around some individual bundles, and then endomysiums are present around each muscle fibers. So they're kind of a complex structure. These are like kind of tubes, inside tubes, inside tubes. There are kind of multiple layers of tubes that are located inside each other. So the largest one on the outside, which is the entire muscle, and then there is a smaller one, and then there's a third one. And each of those three tubes have their own layers around them. The outermost one is the one which is also called as muscular fascia, is the outermost one. So if you open any muscle, you will actually see it on the outside. So for example, any muscle, deltoid muscle for example, the outermost layer that you will see will be that epimysium layer. That is a part of the connective tissue. And then the perimysium will be internal, that we'll see actually in the next slide. And then endomysium is the third one, which is around the individual bundles that make the muscles. Here are those three layers. So This is the outermost. So this is the muscle. This is the skeletal muscle. So in this case, this layer on the outside is called epimysium. This one here, which is covering the entire muscle, which is connected to the bone. The way they are connected to the bone is with the help of this tendon. So tendons are the ones that attach muscles to the bones, and tendons are made of connective tissues, and primarily they contain large amount of collagen to make it very fibrous and very strong structure. Tendons are very strong, and they usually don't break, but they do break also. So they can get detached from the bone, or they can actually break. If you actually put them under a lot of stress, they can break also. But they are just extensions of this epimysium layer, which is covering the entire muscle. So inside this entire muscles are made of those tiny structures, and those tiny structures are covered with these muscle fasciculi. Fasciculi are these layers around these muscles, and those are called perimysium. The coverings are called perimysium. So muscle fasciculi are those individual kind of packets or individual bundles that are located in the inside, and they are covered with their own layer, which is called perimysium. So that's the second layer. The third layer is around those individual muscle fibers. These are the third level of those tube-like structure. They're the smallest one. These are the internal most ones that have their own covering too, which is called endomysium. So that is covering those muscle fibers, individual muscle fibers around them. So there are several layers. So if you have ever seen those muscles, when we eat meat, we eat some of those muscles also. So if you take, especially the meat from thigh, you eat a lot of those muscles also, and the muscles have connective tissue, and you can see some of the connective tissue when you take those muscles. So what is really what really makes those muscles are those muscle fibers. So individual unit there is this muscle fiber. Muscle fibers are these cells. Muscle fibers are those cells that are present in the internal part of the muscles. Okay, so here are different components within those muscle fibers. So muscle fibers are made of myofibrils. So what are myofibrils? Those are proteins, which are very fibrous proteins located inside those myofibrils. Let me go to the next slide, and then we'll come back to this one just to see some more detail here. All right, so here is more detail about the same structure we saw in the previous slide. So the muscle, which is enclosed by epimysium, is made of those muscle fasciculi, which are enclosed by perimysium, and then individual muscle fibers are wrapped around by endomysium. Within those endomysium are muscle fibers. And what are muscle fibers? Muscle fibers are the cells. Those are the cells of the skeletal muscles. Those are called muscle fibers, or those are muscle cells. And just like any other cell, they have pretty much all the components that are needed inside the cell. That include nuclei, that includes mitochondria, it includes the membrane around them, microtubules, and also contains endoplasmic reticulum. But do we see those names here? If that's a cell, do we see all those names, different organelles? No? Actually we do see, but they have changed the names of those things to differentiate them from the cells, which are normal cells of our body. So the layer is there, the outermost layer is there, right? but it is not called as cell membrane or plasma membrane. What is it called? It's called sarcolemma. From plasma membrane, it is called sarcolemma. So that is the cell membrane. Then endoplasmic reticulum, it is called sarcoplasmic reticulum in this case, just to differentiate it and specify it only for the muscle fibers. Nuclei are called nuclei. Then there are some tubes. There are mitochondria. So mitochondria are called mitochondria in this case also. Then they also have some specialized structures which are not seen in all other cells. And those are these type of tiny tubes, which are these transfer tubes. These transfer tubes are called transverse tubules. So they are located around these long rod-like structure, which is one of the myofibrils. Inside this cell, which is muscle fiber, are these myofibrils. Myofibrils are what contain individual units of contraction. So the cell entirely, just like any other cell, cells are filled with something. They are filled with different types of organelles. They have nuclei in them. So general cell, if you see a cell like that, you will see a big nucleus in the middle, then you will see endoplasmic reticulum, you will see Golgi apparatus, those stack-like structure, then you will see different organelles, lysosomes, you will see tiny peroxisomes, and then you will see mitochondria, very frequent. You will see a lot of these ribosomes which are attached or unattached. So that means the cell is completely filled. There's no space inside the cell. In case of these muscle fibers, it is still filled with things, but it does not have all those type of things in the same arrangement. But instead, the cytoplasm of this cell is filled with these myofibrils because it is for contraction. So it replaces the entire cytoplasm inside with these myofibrils. And myofibrils are made of several different proteins. It has two main important proteins that you saw in the video also. It is made of these individual units, which are called sarcomeres, and those sarcomeres are made of two important proteins, which are actin proteins and myosin proteins. Actin and myosin proteins, and since they are in the form of filaments, that's why they are called as actin filament and myosin filaments. And both of those, and there are other proteins too. These two proteins are very significant, and they cover the kind of bulk of this sarcomere or bulk of these myofibrils inside muscle fibers. So now all those things are there. So you need to really understand what are different parts of this cell. And then each cell is supplied with its own capillaries, because it is very actively involved. So it needs actually supply of